I'm so happy to be back again today with Brad about talking about measurement again. We had part one of measurement where we went into the difficulties that happen when we try to measure something precisely. And we were likening that a little bit to the quantum measurement problem, but even more. Well, I'm going to let Brad recap for us a little bit where we got to at the end of the last conversation so that we can move forward with this.
Okay, so hi everyone. We were talking about how everything is measured against a master. That measurement is really a comparison between two things, and even when we get down into measuring mechanical parts or assemblies or anything, it's always a comparison against something, and that's really how our mind functions. So we kind of left off talking about how we try to measure ourselves against the master, and how we interact with people, and how there are continuums between two binaries, and that we try to navigate that, and that we're never really all the way one way or the other, even from the subjective to the objective. But we were talking about the example of justice and mercy, and how we need to navigate that continuum. And so today I was just kind of hoping to pick up on that, and not so much on the physical world, but mainly on the spiritual realm, and how we measure things. And so that's kind of where I'd like to start. I did want to talk a little bit about Ian McGilchrist's work too, because I think it's very relevant to how our culture and how our society has gone off in this notion of apprehending everything, that everything has to be in a little box, and we measure it and it's all perfect, and we stack up all these things, and we build this world around this. It's really a false notion, I think. But I wanted to share something that personally happens to me. It started when I was 14 years old, and I have debilitating migraine headaches, and they've come and gone in waves through the years. But what happens is I have my left hemisphere of my brain actually shuts down, not all at once, but it shuts down in stages. In the very first step is I lose the right half of my vision, and it's hard to describe, because it's not like I just see half of things. I see half of everything. So I look at a word, I don't see half the letters, I see half of each letter. So that's kind of how it starts. It goes into numbness and things on my right side. And I'm trying to bring this, tying this into McGilchrist, because his work really focuses, especially his last book. I started reading that. I've been listening to him, and it's just fascinating. What happens as the migraine progresses, I actually lose the ability to think in words, and I can't speak. I obviously can't see, so I can't read. But what's really, I think, is fascinating, as much as I hate them, and they do hurt. So it's there's a negative to it for sure. But I can listen to like an audiobook and completely understand what's being said, but I can't say it. I can't say anything. So it really made me start to think about how he frames things with the left hemisphere is apprehending, and the right hemisphere is comprehending, and how listening, apparently, and I'm just going by my own experience, the right hemisphere is comprehending, and it can understand language to comprehend. But the left hemisphere is trying to use language to apprehend. So it's going out, and it's going out with an intention. And what is that intention? So it's going to kind of be part of what we talk about today. It's not going to be exclusively about that, but I know you had somebody on your um, channel, I don't know, maybe a month ago, or somebody that had some very debilitating mental problems that came up with him. And it really makes me aware how we're not in control. Like something so simple can just throw us off, and how all this works together. It's really a miracle. It truly is. Um,
Well,
so
what you're talking about with these migraines is absolutely fascinating. I had no idea. I only knew about two different kinds of migraines. The one that's just terrible pain, you know. And
right.
then I one time was driving down the freeway, and all of a sudden, visually, this didn't actually happen, but visually what happened was that the windshield shattered in front of me. Like
Oh wow.
it turned into diamonds or something. And I couldn't see through the windshield. And it just lasted a second. And then it was like my peripheral vision was this, the whole world was just made up of diamonds. It's like the whole thing shattered. My
Yeah.
visual field shattered. And fortunately, it didn't last long enough to put me in danger on the freeway. But when
Yeah.
I got home, I called my optometrist immediately and I said, is it possible that I've had a rupture in the retina or something like that? You know, I was terrified. And I described it to him and he said, no, you've had an optical migraine,
Right.
which
Right.
I didn't know anything about those kinds of things, but so it seems somewhat similar. I mean, it's maybe
No,
it's
it's very
kind of
similar.
the same category.
When I have the aura on the right side, it looks like diamonds. It looks like I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it, but like a kaleidoscope kind of effect
Yes,
that you have,
exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
and that's on the right side. Um, so it's exactly what I have. And when I first had these when I was 14, went to the hospital, and they thought I was having a stroke. So it's very similar symptoms to a stroke,
Hmm.
but they go away. Well, at least so far they've gone away. Sometimes they linger for a day or two, but they're not. It's not really bad symptoms for that long. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's crazy. Uh, so I, I guess as I've gone through these, and I went for years, for I 15, 20 years, I never had them. They went away. But when they started coming back, I actually started having the inability to speak. That was like a new symptom that came in when they came back, when I started having them again. And that was right around the time I started training horses. And what really what really I think everything happens for a reason, and this anomaly come into my life, but it really helped me to focus on listening more, as strange as it sounds, and comprehending things differently, because I can still function when I'm in this state, but it's like right brain function only. Only it's like it's a totally different the way I think, and not being able to think in words is strange. It's very strange. So anyway, I
Well,
wanted to just
I wanted to say something about that not being able to think in words. Because when you were talking earlier, you said that the left hemisphere apprehends and the right hemisphere comprehends. And so when you're listening and you've only got the right on me, it's my right hemisphere. You've only got your right hemisphere to work with. You're comprehending what you're reading, but the left hemisphere, when it's operating, it wants to apprehend, it wants to grab what it is that you've read and then articulate it. And you said going out with an intention. And I think that goes back to that old Russian proverb that I guess maybe I misheard it at some point in my life or something, but it made sense to me that the truth, once spoken, becomes a lie. Because in order to
yes.
speak a truth, it has to go through the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere always has an angle. left hemisphere always has an intention, right? So
Yes.
once the left hemisphere apprehends it and takes it apart and puts it back together again and sends it out, it might start inside your mind as a truth, but by the time it gets out there, it's at least partially a lie. Or even if the words are still true, there's some intention tangled up in there that comes from that side of us, so
Right. Right. And so when I talk about things like this, I don't want people to think, what does Paul Vanderklay call it, colonizing people, where I'm trying to, but I see that all the time. I mean, that's what marketing is. That's what salespeople do. With that, they do it to such a level you can notice it, right? But I think we all do that when we're speaking, when we're trying to communicate. So I'm hoping that you and I and whoever's listening today, we can kind of try and comprehend what's going on here, because I think it's really important to bring everything that we've been talking about and all these discussions on the internet and try to bring it to, how do we use this in life? How do we make this work? How can we find meaning in what we've learned? Otherwise, it's kind of useless. Um, so the whole idea of what McGilchrist's work is, uh, like really trying to get people to use their right brain more, which I think in our culture is really hard. It's really tough to do. And even I know that and I haven't listened to a lot of the videos, but they had the consciousness uh, conference, up in Thunder Bay, I think it was, Paul Vanderklay and Peugeot and John Vervaeke, and I don't remember the other gentleman's name. But to me, that consciousness is actually, I don't know if we can fully comprehend it. I don't even know if we're fully conscious, which is something you don't really hear people talk much about. Um, but when we're interacting with nature and our sensing and how we're perceiving things, it's really comparing frequencies of waves. I mean, that's what light is. The different colors are different wavelengths. Sound, auditory is different wavelengths. I would imagine that, like the sense of smell is probably some kind of a of a wavelength um, of the gases that your nose is smelling. That there's a differences in things at a level that's what, so we're comparing. So that goes back to the measurement. We're kind of comparing wavelengths to one another, and that I think that more advanced um, more advanced consciousness actually can compare things at multiple levels and over time. There's just all these extra um, variables that can be added in. So you compare A to B, but then you can compare, would it be like compare A to A later, into over time, or A now to B later. Patterns, we compare patterns, we compare, like in music, the harmonies, and how you can have a combination of a pattern that produces something that is desirable. So there's so many things that happen in consciousness, and but then it gets into that explosion. What does Vervaeke call it?
combinatorial
Victoria
explosion.
explosion. Right. So it would seem to me that we have to have, and I think that's the discussion that's going on now on the internet, is how do we keep that from happening, but still take into account as much as we can to make good decisions. And after we talked last time, I was thinking about, because I've been watching other videos on the internet about like the quantum realm and and I think Glenn has talked about it, how the observer actually changes what's being observed, right?
Mhm.
And so when our consciousness is dealing with these frequencies that we're interacting with, we are observing something, or we're sensing it, however you want to look at it, because it might not just be visual, it could be auditory or other things. And then we act. So there's a decision that's made, we act somehow to it. Either we flee from it or we go towards it if we think it's food or something positive or negative. And then after we act, we get feedback to see the outcome of that, right? So that's a loop, a feedback loop, that we act, then we resense and act and resense, and that kind of creates the arena that we're in. And that kind of lines up with what they're saying with quantum observation, I think. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about that for a long time, and I think you articulated it beautifully. I mean, I've been trying for a long time to figure out how to articulate it and what words to use. And I think the way that you laid it out is beautifully simple. Here's something I wrote to a friend yesterday. I'm just going to read this paragraph because I kind of put a lot of thought into getting the words right. But a little background before I read the paragraph. We just got back from a trip to Maui. And as part of the trip, my husband's company asked us to sign up for an activity each day. So the first day we went on an ATV ride, which is a once in a lifetime experience, as my husband said, and that was our once. It was, it certainly tested my boundaries. Let's just put it that way. Maybe I'll tell the story later on. But the second day, our activity was to go on a hike, and we were told it was a 2.5 mile moderate hike, and that we should wear a swimsuit under our clothes because you might want to take a swim on the hike. And so I had this picture, kind of romantic picture of maybe walking along the ocean shore and climbing up a hill someplace and diving into a pool, you know. No, they drove us an hour and a half up into the rainforest and dumped us off in the wilderness. And we're crawling over vines and rocks, and it was way beyond my physical capacity. Nothing like a moderate hike. It was up and down hills. And here's a little background. I had my left hip replaced 2 years ago and just got to where I'm pretty stable with that. And then my right hip started to go bad, and I'm having that replaced in 2 weeks.
And here you are hiking in the
And here I am
rainforest.
hiking through the rainforest over roots and rocks and all this stuff. And I'm doing my best to keep up because I don't want to humiliate my husband. And then about an hour and a half into this, we still are only halfway there. We come upon this cliff, and the hike master starts climbing up this cliff. And I honestly thought he was kidding. I thought, oh, he's just shining us on here, you know, and he's going to come back and take us on a trail. No, we are supposed to go up that cliff. And the worst part of it is that the first foothold on the cliff was, I'm going to say, 2.5 feet off the ground. And there was no handhold. There was nothing to lean on, nothing to push off of or anything. And they're expecting me to get my one good leg up on this thing 2.5 feet off the ground. And I stood there for the longest time. I let everybody else go by, and I'm pondering, what can I do? Obviously, I'm going to be measured up against this thing, and I'm going to be wanting. But what can I do? There's no helicopter that's going to fly in there and take me out of the jungle. I had to do it. So with my husband on one side behind me and the hike master on the other side behind me, I had to get my leg up on there somehow and push up off and get them to push me into the mountain and find a handhold someplace and scramble up about 10 feet. And at that point, they did have a ropes course so that you could go the rest of the way with these knotted ropes, kind of pulling yourself.
Oh, so you had, okay.
But it was grueling. It was probably 25 feet up. But what was going on inside me was anger, resentment. Why am I even here? You know I'm going to injure myself doing this. I don't measure up. I'm humiliating my husband. I'm humiliating myself. All this stuff is going through my head. And through confession, I didn't even once think about asking God for help, which would have changed the whole experience, because I know, I mean, I've done this in the past. I know it would change it, but I was so wound up in my own feelings of inadequacy and of not measuring up and all that. So anyway, that's the background to this little paragraph.
Okay.
I got to thinking about the measurement problem, a big problem in quantum physics. Why is it that the probability wave collapses to a particle only when it is measured? Potentiality becoming actuality upon the action of a measurement. We could liken this to our walk through life as individuals. We are bundles of potential standing at the threshold of the future, looking out upon the plane of possibility. We have to make a choice. Jordan Peterson is good at laying out what should guide that choice. His answer is not that much different than ours: a sincere desire to follow God's call on our lives. Anyway, we make a choice and we move into the field of potential, or the probability waves, and instantly something particularizes in our lives. We run into a problem or we gain an insight in one way or another. We come into contact with reality. In a sense, when we make a choice to move in a particular direction, we are measured against reality and usually found wanting. But that process of measurement gives us new information. We now know how far off we are and how far we have to go, and we have new insights about how to get there. The key is having a worthy goal to start with so that the process is bearable and even sometimes can be seen as an adventure. Kind of like our hike up the unscalable canyon wall in the rainforest in Maui. When I was on that hike, I was filled with all kinds of resentment for being made to be there in the first place and the pain and uncertainty it represented. But after it was finished, I realized something new about myself and my potential and God's faithfulness. That new insight gave meaning to the process and made it a worthwhile part of my life and strengthened me for service in the kingdom of God. So that's what I was thinking.
Well, that's well put. And that's true. I think it's very true. I want to add to that though today, because I think we lose sight of the fact that we're observed,
Mm-hmm.
that we're being observed, and that something's acting upon us.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting feedback from us and acting on us again. So there's a feedback going both ways. Now, it could be another person, could be a group of people, could be God, there's something that is always so we're being observed into existence as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of shape the arena, but the arena shapes us.
Yes.
That both are happening at the same time. And we talked about this last time a little bit, how it's it's good to take hold of one thing but not let go of the other. And there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that talks about that a wise man avoids all extremes. And that has, at least in my mind, is that continuum between two binaries, that you don't let go of either one, that you have to be able to move between them as you need to. Even though, not like the feminine and the masculine. A man doesn't always stay at the masculine side. You have to be able to move to the feminine side too. And a woman the same way. So we become, as we're being observed and observing, and we're in this realm, that that oppositional learning and that opponent process kind of comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always there, and we're trying to find that proper place to be. And that's something we touched on in the last conversation. We kind of left it there. But what I wanted to do today was talk about how in the book of First John, it talks about God being love, that God is love.
Mhm.
And when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, he said to love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, you know. But if you think about that, he was saying to love, kind of a strange thing to say, you know, but it's to, at least to me, it's to love the process of love, to love agape. And that as you're trying to navigate these continuums, like if you're in a relationship with a person, and I'll say this too right now, it's like, and then he also said the other command is like it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And that is a continuum where you're loving yourself and you're loving your neighbor, and you're somewhere between those two binaries. You know, when you're setting a boundary with somebody, it's you're navigating between those two, and both of you are working that out. But if you bring the process of agape into this, it acts as a triad. It acts as a, like a lens that you look through to be the observer outside of the horizontal plane. And that's the core to three strands that's talked about, I think, in Ecclesiastes. I know you've mentioned this on your channel before, and that's what you have in a marriage, right? So whenever two people are in a relationship, a hierarchy is formed, ideally, a hierarchy is formed, and the relationship's more important than each individual, that the two become one. And that the whole process of bringing God into it is that we have an observer, we have something else to look through to keep us from going off course. Because all the things you talked about when you were climbing that cliff, we all do that. That's the first place our mind starts going, is all these things, instead of like saying, wait a minute, let's see, can am I able to look through God's eyes in this situation?
Yeah.
You know, can I have an observer try, or maybe I need to bring somebody else in to help me see what I can't see.
Mhm.
um so so that measuring up then becomes possible, because there's something to actually a standard that you can actually look to. Am I making sense there?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think the picture of the hierarchy, I've probably mentioned this before, but it really helps me to think visually of the triangle. In the case of marriage, it's the husband and wife are at the bottom of the triangle on either side. And
Mm-hmm.
the way to come together in your relationship is to move closer to God, because then you come closer to each other.
Right.
So with the neighbor and yourself, the way to come closer to your neighbor would be for each of you to draw closer to God, and then you come closer to each other. But I guess in both cases, we're actually called to draw closer to the other, even if the other isn't making the effort. Right?
Love your
So,
enemy, right?
yeah, yeah. And sometimes your spouse is your enemy, you know. So there are times that you have
sometimes
to.
sometimes I'm my enemy.
Yes, exactly. I am my own worst enemy completely all the
Right.
time. Um, and we're called to love our enemy, whether or not our enemy loves back or even notices, you know. So so it's not a perfect picture, but it does help to think about God being this one who is above our plane and giving us a focus so that we
Right.
get our eyes in the right place, right?
So it becomes like a little triad. Well, you know,
Yeah.
so it's a little harmony in music.
Mm-hmm.
And then that harmony, that little triad, if you have children, now you have this little triad's connected to your child, and then there's a hierarchy there. And then you know, then you have your family and your neighbor. So it's almost like these all connect together. And I've had this vision in my head of this image, and I don't even know where it came from. I don't know if I dreamt it or if I saw it somewhere, but it's similar to the picture over your shoulder there of the cellist playing, and those little dots of light and they're
Mhm.
all connected together. And that's like the network of God's love and how it all is connected together, but it's all connected through these little triads of a neighbor. Yeah, I mean, you can substitute your wife or husband for what, for your neighbor. It's another person in you. And that's, I think when God says that where two or more gather in my name, there I am, he's right there. It's not way out looking for God out, in the heavens. It's right there. It's close.
Mhm.
And we catch the glimpse of that at times. We do see that at times. I think most people do. They may not recognize what actually is going on, but um, so that is like the incarnation of 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 Christ, God in us, in that little triad of love. So, and then I wanted to just kind of go back to.
There's one more way. I just want to add one more visual for the triad, and that is something that was pointed out to me by Jeremy on the channel in the past. When you think about the cross, you have the horizontal, which is looking up to God, and then you have the vertical, which is loving your neighbor. So you're loving God, you're loving your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And then the intersection of loving God and you're loving your neighbor is Christ, is right at the center of the cross. And then that reminded me very much of this literary device. It's called a chiasm. But this literary structure of a chiasm is for the ideas to come to a central point and then from there to go out again, but it creates an X. And that chiastic shape shows up in a lot of stories. If you look at the story of the hero, starting out with a wonderful life, an expansive life, everything's going along well, and then things start to happen and his life gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it constricts down into this very painful, difficult, chaotic situation that he gets bound in, and he has to go through that, and then his life will open up again on the other side. And so the cross is like that, where these two intersect, but Christ's crucifixion is right at the center of that, right? So the all of history leads up to that point, and then all of history comes out of that point. So that chiastic structure is somehow fundamental to everything. And I think that's also a triad because you have the two cross points and the center. That's another kind of a triad.
So there's a constraint.
Yes, a constraint.
The constraint causes potential on the
Yeah.
other side,
Yes, exactly.
right?
So you
Yeah.
have the cord of three strands, you have the triangle, and you have the chiastic structure.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting. I do think I remember you talking about that before. Yeah, that's very interesting. So, um, now one of the things that I wanted to try and so this all sounds nice. This sounds like a great little, little triangle, and this is
Right?
easy to do, right?
Yes.
So what I wanted to try and at least share, and I tried to share this before, and maybe now everything's at a point where there's some language that we've kind of agreed upon as as a little corner of the internet that I maybe I can bring this to the conversation, is that when I was training horses, is it was one of the things that became instantly apparent to me when I started to work with the horse, is that there's a triad involved in how you deal with the horse, in that, like, your intention is one thing, how you're communicating to the horse is another, and then your actions. And that, so as you're trying to navigate one of these continuums, that your communication and your actions, they all move together. So that, and I'll give you an example and it'll make sense. And you've seen this happen when somebody's trying to discipline their child. and they want their child to behave properly. So they have this intention that they're going to discipline them. And then they communicate to the child, you got to do this. If you don't, I'm going to count to 3. But then the actions don't line up with that communication or the intention. So the child can see that there's a breakdown in this harmony, that there's no harmony there. The action doesn't happen. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
I've seen it time and time again, because they'll say, I'm going to count to 3. Okay, I'm going to count to 3. Okay. And then they'll start counting, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4.
Right. But we do that all the time. And a lot of times it's maybe we don't understand our intentions, and we're trying to communicate something to somebody and we're trying to act right, but we don't even understand what our intentions are. And so but all of these have to move together. Otherwise, I think the other person is confused. They don't know. So to have a loving relationship with somebody, you have to learn how to do this. And with a horse, it's like you're bringing in, there's a lot of intentions of why people train horses, and not all of them are good, but even with children too, it's the same way. And I think you even mentioned in our last conversation is like, you try to weigh, when you're trying to navigate between justice and mercy, it's like, what is my intention in this? Am I trying to be liked by my child, or what's going on here? And so that's where the agape comes in, that at least to my way of thinking, that's the lens we're looking through to try and keep this harmony intact and proper. And so the other person that you're dealing with is doing the same thing, and you've seen that when you deal with people. I'm sure that their actions don't match their words, and when that happens, that you're not clear what their intentions are. Then there's a breakdown in that harmony. And I was thinking about how you talked to, I think it was Drew, right, about the music.
Yes.
I think last week. So he talked, and you showed that color, the opposing colors, and how it's not directly across, but it's the 1-3-5 interval in music, that makes the triad chord, and that art's the same way. There's the complementary. And so our actions and our communication, I'm going to kind of make sure I come back to that too, about the communication, because it's not just verbal. You don't talk to a horse, they don't understand what you're saying. They're reading your body language and how you're interacting with them physically. They even the way you breathe will change a horse's perspective on what you're doing to them or what's going on. So they're in tune with a different kind of language than we are. But that's one of the things that I wanted to really kind of bring into the conversation, because there's been a lot of talk about dialogos. Is that what it is? Where you're a lot of, focusing around dialogue. And I think dialogue is important, but if you don't have the action, then you can't really judge the intention. That you have to have those. So when you go out into the rainforest and you're actually doing something with somebody, the whole dynamic changes than if you were just sitting in a room talking, because the physical world pushes you up against fears or uncertainty. Am I going to measure up? There's so many things that actually doing things in the world what requires action, that really exposes some of the things where that harmony breaks down in your communication, your action, and your intention.
Well, and that's why community is so important. That's why
Yes.
all our talking on the internet, and I've mentioned this many times before, it's too easy to get all up in our heads, and I have to go sometimes, and after a conversation, I go clean a toilet or something, because I have to have contact with reality.
Yeah. Okay. Now, how does all this
come? Where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
Am I serving my family? Am I taking care of things?
Exactly.
It's always a balance for me as to making sure that I'm taking care of my home and my husband and all of that, and then having time to do the things that I want. If it was my druthers, I would spend 24 hours a day on this. I mean, I'm so interested in it, but also I have a passion for somehow solving my question and finding a way to articulate it. And I haven't gotten there yet. So I would spend 24 hours a day researching and writing and trying to figure out a way to communicate this stuff. But then I would be neglecting my family and neglecting my home and
which is the
neglecting
whole
my neighbors
purpose
and neglecting my church, which is the whole purpose of
of
our
wanting to find the answer, right? But it's a process of finding the answer, right? I mean, and one of the things that really I like about how you bring your guests and the people you talk to, you're trying to draw this thread between all of this and bring it together, and that's how I think too. I don't pretend to have the answers, but I do see how things connect together.
Mhm.
And so I can take other people's answers and say, well, these are very similar and they kind of go together. So
Mhm.
um
So
so
anyway, I didn't want to interfere, but you were talking about intention, communication, and action, and how the three always have to work together in order to communicate properly.
well, the love properly. I mean, that I think that's really like the whole idea of loving wisely, is that all of these three things are in harmony together, and if you get one of them out, it will be noticed.
Mm.
It will be noticed. And when, Peterson talks about speaking truthful, it's communicating. It may not just be verbal, but I could say the right thing and roll my eyes when I do it, and that means something totally different, right? So that's going to expose my intentions, and it should, because
Mm.
then it's it's not in love. So it's being attentive to these things, and when you're interacting with other people, you're paying attention to those three things too. What are they communicating, and what are their actions? Because we really can't know their intentions. We don't even know our own intentions a lot of times. So but we try to make those judgments on what we're sensing in
Mhm.
the communication and through their actions, so that we can say that their intentions are in alignment with the other two. um so when I was talking about this in our last conversation, I was saying how, like, when one thing moves on this, you're trying to like come up with this visual of how all this works, like some kind of a diagram or something. But that's part of it. As one thing moves, the others have to move with it. There's some, and if they don't, it's obvious. I think it's obvious. Maybe not right away, but it will become obvious at some point that there's a breakdown in that harmony. Um, so when you talk to Michael Levin about cells and how they interact with each other, I I kind of like, I can't help but think those cells are in some kind of form of agape love. They're competing with each other somewhat, but they're also looking out for each other and communicating, and there's intention, there's action, and they all work together. And when something goes wrong, the other cells deal with that one cell because it's not good for the whole. I don't know what you think about that. Um, but it seems like a living organism operates in this structure, that a cell can't pretend that it's something else. It's going to get found out. That's kind of what cancer is, right? So um
Yeah, I mean, when a cell decides to go off, decides when a cell goes off on its own and just starts proliferating, it has abandoned its responsibility to the
to the
greater
whole.
body. Yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I was thinking the other day about this principle, one of these days I really have to sit down and try to talk to my audience about the principles and elements of art, because that's my whole shtick, is that I believe that they're kind of at the foundation of everything, all these design principles. But one of them is dominance. And in a painting, you have to have a dominance. If you don't have a dominance of something, then the whole thing just looks like wallpaper, because everything is equal. So you have to have something that is the most. You have to have one of my teachers called it Papa, Mama, Baby. So maybe Papa is 70%, Mama is 20%, and Baby is 10%. So one way that this might work out is the painting is 70% dark colors, 20% light colors, and 10% black, or 10% very bright color. So there's some little thing that's the focal point, but there's a dominance of something that unifies the painting. The dominance unifies, but it's not a dominance like a dominance hierarchy where it's a power play, because when you look at the painting, you don't even see the dominance. What you see is the focal point. The dominance just establishes a bed, establishes a platform for the focal point to shine. And if we think of our human bodies in that articulation, imagine that most of your body is, by number, most of your body is bacteria. And then by number, maybe the next category would be cells. But they're there to support the functioning of the whole body. And it goes all the way up. So the cells support the functioning of the organs, and the organs support the functioning of the whole body. But the head at the same time is taking care of the whole body, because if the head makes bad decisions, then it doesn't matter how well the cells are doing, the whole thing is going to die, right?
Right.
So it's this perfect picture of dominance being there to support the focal point, but the focal point is the purpose for the whole painting. So the focal point is the purpose for the whole body, and also gives meaning to the rest of the body and protects the rest of the body. And
so it's a two-way feedback loop.
yes, exactly.
Right. And that's kind of I was talking about that, about the observed and the being observed, that everything is that way, at least the way I see it. That there's, and I think that when we get off base is when our feedback loops aren't correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's really where we start to veer off. Either we're not paying attention or not attending to the proper feedback loops, or they're being hijacked, which that happens,
Or we're misinterpreting the message. We can do that too. We can get a message and we can misinterpret it.
Right. Well, and that goes kind of talking about my migraines that I have. Are we trying to take in and comprehend the message, or are we trying to apprehend it? Because as soon as we do that, now we're distorting it. To wield it, it's a different purpose. The intention changes rather than it changing us. So and I know sometimes when you get into a heated conversation with somebody, you're listening to them with the intention to reply and not to take in what they're saying. You're you're trying to formulate the argument before you even listen to what they say. So yeah, so this whole idea that I'm just trying to convey is how the love of God and how agape is intertwined in everything that's good, and it's part of the fractal as it goes up too, right? But there's also fractals go both directions. I think this same process can undo us as well. I don't know if you listened to that conversation that Peterson had with Matthew Peugeot. That was last week, I think.
Mm-hmm.
they were talking about the garden, you know, and this listening to the snake and stuff. And I
Mhm.
think I appreciate the different perspective that he brings. And he got so close to, and Peterson even talked about this a little bit. He said, is I can't remember how Peterson said it, but it was something to the effect of, is it that Eve tried to become the observer? And I'm like, that's exactly what I wanted to say in our conversation today, is that um it's like, it's in Matthew Peugeot's how he laid it out. Adam named the animals, and then Eve was looking at the boundaries and the categories, and the snake wasn't happy with the category, and she's supposed to listen to the snake. But the snake said that you would be like God. So that's like taking him, Eve would be taking a step above Adam, and she would be the observer, the sole observer of this triad, rather than God being the observer. And I think when we do that, then this whole dynamic goes the wrong direction.
Mhm.
So
And when you say the observer, you mean the one who is making the measurement, the one who's judging,
the master,
discerning
yeah, you
whether or not you measure up.
right. So Eve, or me, steps into the position of being the master,
Mhm.
that things have to measure up to my expectations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, Brad. That
So,
is beautiful.
and when that happens, then everything moves away from agape. And then that whole web of love that you could be involved in starts to unravel, because you're not in the proper position. And that's one of the things that I've been wondering about with even the dialogos and stuff, and Vervaeke's attempt to try and create a religion that's not a religion. It still seems to me that there's a desire to be above looking down at it. And I don't think that that's proper. That there needs to be something outside that observes, and that we have to be willing to be shaped by that. And we are being shaped by something outside all the time, and we have to acknowledge that, and in a lot of ways surrender to that. Is
Yeah, I think you hit on exactly what's missing um in a lot of the conversations, is this: we have to be willing to be shaped by that. If I put myself in the position of being the master that everything has to measure up to, which I do 1,000 times a day,
we all do, yeah.
I'm always judging that other people aren't measuring up to whatever my expectations are. What I'm really doing is bringing everything down to the lowest common denominator, because I don't know. I don't know the answers. I don't have an answer
Right.
to anything, right? And I don't know what's good for me. If I did what I thought was good for me, I'd probably sit in a chair and read books all day and eat bonbons, and I'd end up 800 pounds, and my brain would be fried, and um so the whole idea that we can come up with some idea of how people might act together in community to the benefit of everybody, without that outside view that God gives us, that meta, I think it's in chapter 4 of Hebrews, it actually uses the word meta in reference to the perspective that Jesus has, that he sees above, he sees beyond what we can see, right? And what was the other thing I was thinking about in reference to that?
Paul Vanderklay calls it the monarchical vision, where you're above looking down.
Well, when we take the monarchical vision, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we take it, it's a monarchical vision, right? But when God takes it, it's just reality, it's just truth. Because he has a vision of wholeness and love and goodness, and so then when we participate in that, and when we put ourselves in a position where we're willing to be measured by that. And then if we're a little bit short, we're willing to have something added on. And if we're a little bit long, we're willing to have things carved off so that we can fit that measure that he has for us. Then he knows what's best. We don't know what's best. So this whole thing of trying to imagine a world where there is no God outside, I mean, they're always talking about, yes, there's the transcendent, there's the immanent, there's the God outside, there's the God inside, transcendent and immanent. Yes, but he's also as close to us as breathing.
Right.
He's also there with us every moment when we're in conversation with another person, when we're praying, or just when we're trying to help another person. He's always there. He's holding our hand. He's carrying us. I mean, to imagine a world without that is to say, I am the one that's going to decide, or some elite group is going to decide. That's the totalitarian impulse. Did you see that conversation that Jordan Peterson had with Alex Story on the totalitarian impulse?
Yes.
So good.
Yes, it was. It was very good.
Yeah.
It was very good. And you made me think of something, and I guess I'll share it. When I was raised in a home that was fundamentally atheist, and I mean that in a derogatory way.
Mhm.
People can be fundamentalists about atheism just as much as they can be about theism. And when I got to the point where my first daughter was born, that is the point where everything, all the constraints come together. One of many times it's happened, but it's where everything came together, and I knew in my heart that I could not love my daughter, the way she needed to be loved, that I had no capacity of doing that. That's what set me off starting to read the Bible, starting to look into. And when I started reading the Bible, it was almost like Tom Holland has, he talks about, I'm like, our whole culture is built on this book. I was taught my whole life it was just bunk. It's like, well, why is everything revolve around this? Our legal system, our values, everything come from this. So so that changed me and set me off on this journey to look for how to build love. How can I love her? you know um and it's so beautiful now she has children, and to see her the same way with her kids, trying to be that parent and loving them the way they need to be loved. So um and that's that web of love. Glenn talks about the symphony of, how does he put that, the symphony of
Choices
decisions,
over time.
choices over time. So love is like a symphony of proper relational choices over time. That's what love is. It's that all of those triads you play, and sometimes you have to go off and do this riff like the guy playing Mozart, was it,
Mhm.
you were talking about earlier, and you sometimes you have to improvise, but you have some enough of an understanding of how it works that you can do that. So I really think that for me, and it's something that even with church, how when we go to church, church's role in the culture has been replaced by the government in a lot of ways, as far as activities and what we're supposed to do. So we don't have the we can say the words and even have the intention, but we don't have the action involved to really refine that harmony, to know how to act in the world. At least I've found that. I mean, some churches probably do, but most of the churches I've attended, they're not involved in the community much. But I think also if you're doing something, it has to be something real. There's something that really matters. Because I was involved with a lot of youth groups and stuff when I was younger, and just doing activities with the kids, it's not something that really matters, a lot of it. It's
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that was distressing to me to see the difference between my older daughter. When my older daughter was in youth group, we were in a church where they really emphasized that this was worth something giving your life for. And they would have activities that they would do together, like going and trying to share the gospel with people, or going and doing some sort of service activity in town or something, helping other people. And there was a lot more of that. And then when my younger daughter came along and she was in youth group, it was all about, I don't know, they'd have, I can't even remember the names of the parties, like duck lips parties, and there's all these just weird activities that they would do that were super fun for the kids, as though that's going to draw people into the group. But if you don't give them something that says this is worth giving your life for, then
right.
there's absolutely nothing to hold on to. Once the fun and games is over, then what?
I think that's a big part of the meaning crisis, is the lack of action. I'm a, did you remember do you remember the Unabomber that
Yes.
and Ted Kaczynski? Did you ever
Mhm.
read his manifesto? They published
Just,
it in the newspaper
just
back.
I just scanned a little bit here and there.
It would, obviously his conclusions were way off base, but he mentioned something in there, and it was at least a term that I I understood what he was saying. He said that society, because the technology, has lost meaningful activity, and that we replace it with surrogate activities. And I don't think that's his own thing. I think that was from somebody else, but um, that kind of stuck with me when I read that. And it's like, that is kind of true, because if it's not something that's a necessary activity, you deep down know that it's not meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can consume yourself with doing your yard work, and it can be really nice and stuff, but is that really something that brings deep meaning to a person?
Mm-hmm.
Um, where
How about if you were doing somebody else's yard work?
potentially, yeah,
Well, I mean, there's a guy that I follow on Twitter that I really like. I can't remember his name right now, but he started a thing where he just decided he was going to mow lawns for people who were incapable of mowing their own lawns. And so he started going around and, mowing lawns for disabled veterans or for elderly people. And then he kind of thought, well, I should let somebody else in on this because it's so joyful. And so he came up with this idea for young people that he would challenge any young people to take the 50-yard challenge, and they could sign up. And if they would agree to mow 50 yards for disabled people, or, people who weren't able to mow their own yards in their communities, he would provide them with a new lawnmower and set them up so they could have a little gardening business. And some people came along and said, well, we'd like to support you financially if you're going to do that. And so now he goes to all 50 states and he delivers these lawnmowers to these kids who've completed the 50-yard challenge. And so
right,
that's meaningful, because that's building something into
right.
the lives of these young people to say, I want to serve, I want to help, I want to make my community better.
And that's a great example, because that's where I was going to kind of go, is that we need the meanings there. There are meaningful things. It's everywhere. We have to go out and do it and find it and encourage others to come along. And there's meaning right inside your own family. There's needs there. There's relational needs there that we can engage in,
Mm-hmm.
because that's really what it's all about, is how, I mean, value is all about how things relate, and how we relate to human beings is really where God is. That's where we find him anyway. So I mean, it's like a call to action, I guess. I'm probably talking to myself as much as anybody else.
Well, we have to do that, don't we? I mean, I
Yeah.
have to talk to
Yeah.
myself. Yeah. Um,
Right. Right. It's not, I guess it's just not, it's not enough to, what was it in James, that faith without deeds is dead? And that's kind of going back what I was talking about before. It's like you can say the right things and you can pretend you have the right intentions, but if you don't have the deeds that go along with those other two, then your intentions are exposed. It's not real, because love is going to provoke you to do those things.
mhm.
It's going to provoke action, and then that action brings meaning, that encourages, and then it also demonstrates to other people how to live in this world. And it is all in the real world too. I imagine you can do some things online. I'm not trying to totally discredit doing conversations with people online if they're struggling, or helping them out. I'm sure there's a lot of good that happens too, but it's not enough. At least I don't think it is. So
Yeah, I struggle with that. I mean,
it's a
the
lot easier.
the better
For sure.
if you provide really good content, then what you're really doing is encouraging people to spend more time online. So it's,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
complicated.
it is. It is. That's why I never started the YouTube channel. I mean, I obviously have one so I can track different channels and stuff and follow, but I never really put out any content of my own. Um, I don't know. So I think that I think there's something to not being the observer, to surrendering to somebody outside being the observer. I think that's really important. That observer helps to create who we are. And I think that's important too. And then we have to be able to let go or add, like you said. Sometimes you need trimmed off, and sometimes you need to augment what you are with
Mhm.
some other skills, or the fruits of the spirit. That's something else that really had, just this past week, it kind of grabbed me again. It grabs me over and over through the years, but like being plugged into this network is like being plugged into a vine. And Jesus talks about being in the vine, you're going to bear fruit, right? But fruit isn't for us to eat. It's fruit. We fruit tree doesn't grow tree, or a fruit tree doesn't grow fruit so it can eat its own fruit. It's for others to eat, right?
Mhm.
And love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, they're all relational too. And they all have to do with you giving that fruit, that it's available for somebody else. So like the guy mowing lawns, and the joy that comes out of that, and the love that the people feel from him sharing that joy with them and with the young people. There's fruit on that vine, and that's something that we need to be striving towards.
Well, and I like what you said about the fruit is not there for us to eat. And times can come in your life when you can't see the benefit of your fruit to other people.
Right.
Missionaries have gone sometimes to countries and labored there for 40 years and never seen any, they think they've never seen any fruit. And then they leave and they come back to the United States and retire or whatever, or they die. And then things just begin to flourish. And, a tremendous Christian community grows out of that, because what was left was a seed. So like, even with a tree, if even if the fruits aren't eaten and the fruits just fall on the ground, they fall into the ground, and then they sprout up as a seed, and then that seed grows a new tree with many trees, maybe with more fruit. That's the really interesting thing about a tree, right? Is it produces way more seed than to just reproduce itself. It produces
Oh,
enough seed
yes.
to make many, many trees with many, many, many more seeds. So
No, that
we
is
don't,
true.
the thing is, we don't know what our fruit is accomplishing.
Right. It's
And
a
if we,
symphony over time,
yeah,
right?
and
So it
if
might
we
be,
get all angsty about that and say, oh my gosh, I'm not producing any fruit, then immediately you stop producing fruit because you're not the same open, visible person anymore. We need to just trust that God is producing fruit in us and God is using that fruit and he's going to use it in whatever way is best for his world. You know, I mean, really, I mean, my rock is that God is good and he knows what he's doing.
eh, you know, and even our willingness to accept fruit from others.
Yes.
That's something else that I struggle with. You get in the wrong frame of mind, and you can't even see that it's there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and so so that loving your neighbor as yourself, sometimes sometimes you need help. Sometimes you got to let that neighbor help you.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise that little triad of harmony isn't working right either. And that's the rugged independent person that I am. I want to take everything on my own in my own time, when a lot of times there is something that I need and could have a lot sooner than later, but I fight it because of pride
Mm-hmm. And then what you're also doing then is stealing the opportunity that the other
from
person
them,
has to, yeah, exactly.
right?
It took me a long time to
And
learn
that
that.
and that discourages them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's almost like punishing them for doing the right thing. Peterson talks about that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the
Yeah.
best way to just quench proper behavior. And if somebody has something for you like that, then that's where we need to be aware and take it, um,
Mm-hmm.
for their sake and yours. So yeah, it's pretty interesting when you think about this thing in like this picture of this network. It's like these little nodes of love, a little node of light, a little triad, and how they're all connected together. Um, I don't know. I've been having some pretty interesting thoughts about that over the years, and you can see it. You can see it sometimes. I don't know. It's just as plain as day to me that it's there.
Well, I think it goes all the way down to the very fundamental basis of the universe. Did you ever?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I'm not trying to get people to watch my channel or anything, but I'm just wondering if you ever watched the little solo thing I did where I talked about love being the one rule.
Mhm.
And I was talking about Wolfram's model
Right.
of fundamental physics and really that maybe love is the one rule that ties all the nodes and edges together, you know,
Yeah. I
because,
think. I
because
think
it's
it
all
is.
relational.
Yes.
Even Carlo Rovelli is this physicist who insists that everything is just relational, that I don't necessarily agree with him about this, but that in his model, even the particles aren't like what you would say real. It's just the relationships between particles that create reality. And I mean, I certainly see that in art. It's the relationships. You know, you were talking earlier about wave, that what we're doing really in life is we're just comparing frequencies or wavelengths.
Yeah.
That's how we see, or that's how we hear, that's how we sense, is by comparing wavelengths. Well, when you're making a work of art, every stroke has to compare to the stroke before. Am I looking for something lighter or darker? Am I looking for something more saturated or less saturated? Am I looking for something that's the same or different? So there's just all these comparisons that have to be made between these wavelengths. But if I want to make a let's say a tan area appear to be white, all I have to do is put something really dark next to it, because that darkness next to that tan will make the tan just blaze out of the picture. So it's all in what's next to it. It's all in the relationships that everything has with everything else that creates the illusion,
Right.
I guess, if you will, of what you're trying to say. So our relationships that we have with each other are like that, and they're all in context. We're all in context with each other, and that context is vitally important. But that context is based on the triad that you were talking about of our intentions, our communication, and our action.
Right. Yeah, it's ev- thinking about like painting, for example, or like what I do on when I design. But we'll use painting because you do that, and I've tried to paint before. So you have a canvas that's white. When you're looking at that white canvas, I guess it doesn't have to be white, but if you assume it's a white canvas, that is reflecting off a quantum field all the wavelengths that we sense. So we're actually seeing every color. And when
Mhm.
you take your brush and you dip it in blue paint and you paint on that, it's actually subtracting everything but the blue. It's a subtraction process, not actually, you're not adding blue, you're subtracting everything but blue. But that's not how we perceive it at all. We think we're painting it blue, right?
Mhm.
So what's really going on in the background, it's I don't know how relevant that is. Does that change how you paint if you knew that you were subtracting everything but
Well,
blue?
it reframed something for me right now, because sometimes I will paint the canvas orange or I will paint it blue before I start making a painting, and I will do that specifically to narrow my choices, because otherwise starting with the white canvas is combinatorially
Yeah.
explosive.
So you're narrowing. You're
Right, I'm
narrowing.
narrowing it down. So now I have something to fight against. I have something to compare against. When I have a white canvas, I can't, but you just opened that up for me. The reason I can't is because that white is everything,
Yeah.
and everything is too much.
It's actually chaos.
Yeah, so
So
you have to carve away everything down to something that's manageable.
right. And that's pretty much in the design process. What I do is, the screen on my computer, it's just a white background. And it's just
Mhm.
the possibilities of what I design is everything.
Mhm.
So I start by bringing in the product or the part that I'm going to start either inspecting, or it's going to be assembled, and I put that in space. So now I want to build everything around this piece, and
Mhm.
what's going to happen to it. And our life is like that too. The difference is that, like you were talking about earlier with the missionaries, is the time element. And God works in decades
Mhm.
sometimes, and we don't see when we're putting these little pieces together, and then we don't see it go anywhere, but it goes somewhere. I've had things come back to my life that I didn't even know about, something that I did and how I interacted with somebody. I wasn't really even like cognizant of it. I wasn't even aware of it. And later it came back, and it just blew me away. It's like, really? Did you ever have that happen? It's
Yes. Yes.
so it's amazing how our interactions with this world, and how our observations and our, and what we're doing in this arena is shaping someone you don't even really know that it's happening at all.
This is
So,
why when Jordan Peterson used to talk about how everything matters,
mhm,
you have a choice. Either nothing matters, in which you can be completely nihilistic and just give up, or everything matters. And when everything matters, that's pretty scary. So if
right,
somebody comes to you and says, this thing that you did back then really had an impact on my life and it changed the course of my future, right? Then I have to think about all the things that I didn't do, that I could have done, that could have had this positive impact, right? or all the times that maybe I did something that had a negative impact that I'm not aware of because those people haven't come back to me, So yes, yeah, it's kind of terrifying when
But
you have those experiences.
even that could be turned into good. That's the story of Joseph, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and I've seen that happen as well. Things that I completely messed up on, and it actually was turned into something positive.
Well, and so I know the things that people did to me where they really messed up that have certainly worked for positive in my life, right? So,
Right. And it comes back to the fruit of the spirit in them being forgiving towards me, or me being forgiving towards somebody, and how that can change the arena that you're in,
mhm,
because it's taken the anomaly and changing it into something that puts everything on a different trajectory.
yeah.
So that's where the agape comes in, because that isn't like our nature to do that, and that's the self-sacrifice.
So when you define, could you define agape the way you think of it? That might be a good place to end with a good definition of agape.
So it's love that's looking out for the individual and the whole over time. It's that symphony of proper relational decisions over time. I think that when Glenn said that in his one um, talk he had with you, man, did that capture me. It's like, that is so, and he's talking about computation, but if you think like agape, that is what it is, and when you listen to Paul describe that, or really try to understand or comprehend what Paul's saying in Corinthians 13, 1 Corinthians 13, about love and what it is, that all those things about being patient, like that triad. And sometimes that this can't happen right now, whatever's going on, we have to be patient and see what happens down the road. So that to me is, like, I think, a good definition of agape.
Mhm.
What's your definition? Do you have one?
Well, I like your definition. The one that is it is it Vervaeke that says it's willing the best for the other? Um, I guess whoever came up with that, the thing I like about that is it does have to do with the will, because we can't always want the best for the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
I should want the best for the other, but I don't always. But if I determine in my heart that I want to, how do I put this? That love is an action, love is an act. Love is not an intention. Intentions are not enough. And love is not even words. That's not enough. But love is an act. And that the actions matter. And so even if I don't feel agape, if I act with agape, then God is always faithful to bring the feelings along with it. God is always faithful to make a space for the intentions and the communication to catch up with the action. Because I think a lot of life works the other way. I have an intention and then I communicate my intention, and that sort of puts me on the hook for acting,
Action,
get the
right?
act out there,
Yes.
right? Because I put myself
and
on the hook now.
and now you don't know how to do it.
Yeah,
Right. So
yeah,
God helped me love my little daughter.
yeah,
That's exactly how I got to that conclusion. I could say all the words, I could have the intention. If I don't act it out to her,
yeah,
it's meaningless. It's just a gong, right? A clanging gong.
yeah.
Um, so that's good. I really think I want to jump back, if I could, to our last conversation. I talked about measurement and how we compare things, right? And how love, or how, like, even math, there's an equal sign. There's two sides, and we're comparing one side to the other. basically what math is.
Mhm.
All these equations, as long as they could be, they all are one number, and all this equation, they're equal or they're not equal. But I was wondering too, when I was thinking about this, and I've thought about this a lot too, about how loving your neighbor as yourself, can an equal sign be in there? Is it not a comparison? Isn't that what Jesus is saying? It is a comparison in a way. And that if somebody doesn't love themselves enough to set a boundary, they're actually not loving the other person either.
Mhm.
And there's a real truth in that. Now we could take that loving yourself, obviously in the wrong way, take it where you're putting the boundary too close to the other person, right? So that finding where that needs to be is a negotiation. And if you're not strong enough, and that's one of the things I love about Peterson, and he talks about people that are high in agreeability, they're going to struggle with this. They, you know, they have a hard time saying no. They have a hard time setting that boundary. So agape is dealing with that side of it as well. It's dealing with both sides of the equation. It's being willing to die to yourself for the other, but also being willing to stand up to for yourself for the benefit of the other too, and knowing when to do which.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, that's where the devouring mother comes in, right? Because if love is only a one-way thing, and I don't have a responsibility also to myself, then I can give so much of myself that there's nothing left of me.
It becomes parasitic.
And then all of that I'm giving of myself to that other person is stealing the agency of that other person from being able to do the things that they should have been able to do for themselves, because I'm taking care of
Right.
everything, right?
Right.
So love is a matter of also seeking wisdom to love well. And yeah, yeah, it's a deep well.
Right.
You know, that's one of the greatnesses of God, is that he's given us this deep well to draw from. There's so much to contemplate, and so much to act out. And
Right.
and hopefully all of us here in this little corner, we can love each other well, and we can help each other to act well, to get out there in the community and be a part of it.
Right. Because that's really where it's going to make the biggest difference.
Yeah. This has been great, Brad. I don't know if you were able to talk about the things you wanted to talk about, because I jumped in and said an
No,
awful.
oh no, this is great. I mean, we can digest this and talk again in the future if you want. But
That sounds good. I really like that, where your mind goes. It helps me think things through. So
yeah, and I hope more people get engaged in your channel. I think you have one of the best channels on YouTube. I really enjoy it. I like the effort you put into it, and the different guests you have and how they interact. Um, yeah, it's really good. There's been times when you've had a guest on, and it's exactly what I needed to hear that week. You know, it's like,
well, it feels like family to me, and even the commenters, they just feel like family to me. So I really appreciate everybody.
yeah, 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 and it's good. And there's a lot of really good comments too.
Yeah,
You know, really make you think.
yeah.
So,
Well, this has
all
been
right,
great. Let's do this again someday, and I'll get back to you after I finish my surgery.
okay. Well, I hope it all goes well. When is that going to be? In November?
Well, it's so funny. It was October 25th, and then they rescheduled it to October 10th. And so I thought I was going to have to cancel
Ooh,
all these conversations. And then 2 days before, they got back to me and they said, we're rescheduling it out of November 8th.
okay.
So it's November 8th. That's the big day.
All right. Well, I'll keep you in my prayers.
Thank you,
All right.
Brad. I appreciate that.
All right.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.